So, we've been getting a lot of questions about, this idea of a far-right dynasty. And you sent over this article, and it really digs into that, that idea. And it all kind of centers around Trump and his choice of J.D. Vance as his running mate. So let's just jump right into it. The author seems really kind of baffled by the choice of Vance. Like, they don't really see him as a political heavy hitter or anything like that. So what's the author's take on why Trump would pick him?
Yeah, so the author's arguing that this pick, it really goes against the grain of like, how running mates are usually chosen. Like, usually it's about like balancing the ticket or appealing to a wider range of voters. But the author lays out these like five main points as to why Trump might have made this decision. And it's pretty interesting stuff. Like one of the ideas is that Trump might actually see Vance as like a form of assassination insurance.
Assassination
Yeah,
insurance.
that like Vance is, according to the author, they say he's not very popular, and so the thinking is that no one would want to take Trump out if it meant like Vance would just step right in.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty dark thought, isn't it?
It is, yeah, it's a pretty chilling theory, and it speaks to this, this very calculated way that the author believes Trump operates. And then there's this whole other layer, which is that the author suggests that Trump might be really concerned about having someone who's just completely loyal to him, like no matter what. Um, someone who wouldn't like, break ranks the way that, say, Mike Pence did
Yeah.
back in 2020.
Yeah, right. That was not a good look for Pence,
Mhm.
at least in Trump's eyes, I mean.
Right, exactly. It seems like for Trump, loyalty is it's paramount, maybe even more so than experience or, even electability, according to the author.
So it's more about like who's going to have your back no matter what rather than like who's the best fit for the job. Is that what you're saying?
That seems to be the underlying theme here. Like the author really paints this picture of Trump as someone who's, really trying to build up this network of people who are just, completely devoted to him and, willing to carry out his agenda, whatever that may be.
Okay, so and this all ties into this bigger idea of a dynasty, right? Like it's not just about this election, it's about, establishing some kind of like long-term influence on American politics.
Exactly. The author actually points out that, Trump has like openly kind of expressed envy for other political families, like, the Bushes, the Clintons, the Obamas. And it seems like he wants to, build something similar, like a legacy that extends beyond just his own presidency. And to do that, he needs people who are, fully on board with Trumpism, whatever that means.
So they're like potential torchbearers, to keep that flame alive, so to speak.
Exactly.
But if the author doesn't think Vance is all that impressive, why do they think he was chosen for this role?
Well, the author makes this interesting comparison between Vance and Charlie Kirk.
Charlie Kirk from Turning Point USA.
Right, him. They're both, according to the author, they're both fiercely loyal to Trump. But more importantly, they kind of lack, any strong political identity of their own, at least in the author's view. So they're almost like, blank slates that Trump can project his own ideas onto.
So it's almost like it doesn't even matter what their qualifications are as long as they're, fully committed to Trump and his vision.
That seems to be the implication. Yeah.
So the author's saying that Trump values loyalty above all else, even experience, even like broad appeal.
That's the argument they're making.
But what's the end game here? Like, is it just about, controlling the Republican Party, or is there something more to it?
Well, the article suggests that Trump might actually be aiming for something much more radical than that. They point to his apparent fascination with this thing called the Insurrection Act of 1807. Yeah, so basically it's this law that allows the president to to use the military domestically. And the author connects this to Trump's anxieties about his legacy, like how he's going to be remembered in history. They point to things like, January 6th, the George Floyd protests, all those events that, really tarnished his image, at least in the eyes of many. And they suggest that he might be looking for ways to control how those events are portrayed, to rewrite the narrative, so to speak.
So using technology to like spin the story in his favor.
That's the suggestion, yeah.
Yeah.
The author seems to think that Trump sees technology as this, this powerful tool that he can use to manipulate information and shape public perception.
And this is where it gets really interesting, because the author then goes on to talk about how J.D. Vance might fit into this whole scenario. And it's, well, let's just say it's not very reassuring. We'll get into all of that and more right after the break.
So we're talking about like a potential strategy where loyalty trumps everything else, even, democratic norms. But how does that actually play out in like real world policies? What is the author actually worried about?
Well, the author points to Vance's stance on Ukraine as a really troubling sign. They highlight how he's basically said he'd be open to like ceding Ukrainian territory to Russia, which aligns with what the author sees as Trump's own desire to appease Putin.
Yeah.
And they argue that this willingness to like throw a Democratic ally under the bus, so to speak, it speaks volumes about what Vance might do if he ever, actually had real power.
Yeah, that's putting it mildly. I mean, it's one thing to talk about loyalty, but when it comes at the expense of, national security, international alliances, that's a whole other level. It's like
Yeah.
this potential dynasty wouldn't just be bad for America, it could destabilize the whole world, at least according to the author.
Right. The implications are definitely global. And it's not just about foreign policy either. The author brings up Trump's, his previous statements about wanting to use the Insurrection Act to like put down protests, like the ones that happened after George Floyd was killed.
So like using the military on American citizens, that's a pretty scary thought.
Yeah, it's definitely a cause for concern. And the author seems to believe that that Vance wouldn't hesitate to support that kind of action, that he'd be more interested in, protecting the dynasty than upholding democratic principles.
So we're talking about like a potential slide towards authoritarianism with Vance as like a willing accomplice.
That's one interpretation.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got this potential dynasty, this disregard for democratic norms, and now we're adding like the potential for military force against American citizens. It's a pretty bleak picture, to say the least. But the article doesn't stop there, does it? There's this whole other layer to it, and it involves, well, Elon Musk.
Right, that's where things get really interesting. The author argues that this potential Trump dynasty, it wouldn't just be about political power. It would be deeply intertwined with technology.
Yeah.
And they see Musk as like a key player in all of this.
Okay, so Elon Musk, the guy from Tesla, SpaceX, that Elon Musk, what's the connection to Trump?
Well, the author claims that Musk's influence on Trump goes way beyond like just public endorsements. They point to Musk's own ambitions in areas like, AI, space exploration, social media, all that stuff. And they suggest that Trump might be willing to give Musk like unprecedented power and influence in those areas in exchange for his loyalty and support.
So it's like a trade-off. Trump gets Musk's backing, and Musk gets to like reshape the world in his image.
That's the basic idea.
Okay, but like how realistic is that? I mean, it sounds like something out of a movie.
Well, the author points to Musk's, his takeover of Twitter, his stance on like content moderation, and his willingness to, work with authoritarian governments as like potential red flags. They argue that Musk's vision of the future might align a little too closely with Trump's desire for control and, his disregard for traditional norms.
So we're talking about a potential situation where Trump's political ambitions and Musk's technological ambitions basically become one and the same.
That's the concern the author's raising.
And Vance, with his, unwavering loyalty, he'd just go along with all of this.
That's what the article seems to be implying.
So to sum it up, we've got a potential Trump dynasty, potentially enabled by figures like Vance, with Musk potentially pulling the strings behind the scenes. It's a lot to unpack.
It definitely is. But it's important to remember that, this is just one interpretation of events, one possible future. It's up to us to, to think critically about what we're hearing, to consider other perspectives, and to stay informed.
Absolutely. And speaking of staying informed, the article goes even deeper, outlining some pretty unsettling predictions about what this potential dynasty could mean for everyday Americans. We'll delve into all of that right after this. So we've been talking about this theory of a Trump dynasty, potentially backed by tech giants like Elon Musk. And, it's easy to dismiss that as like, conspiracy theory stuff. But the article, it lays out some pretty specific ways this could actually impact, everyday people like us.
Yeah, the article paints a pretty stark picture of what they see as like a potential surveillance state where, all that data that's collected about us, our online activity, our location data, all of it, it could be used not just by companies to target us with ads, but by the government to, to monitor our behavior, to predict our political leanings, even to like silence dissent.
So, like, imagine a world where, I don't know, your social media posts, the things you search for online, even just like where you go with your phone, all of that can be used against you, not even in a court of law, just like to control what you see, what you hear, what you're allowed to say.
That's that's the kind of dystopian future that the author is warning about,
Mm.
and they argue that, these tech leaders like Musk, who are often hailed as these like, geniuses, innovators, they could end up being the ones who, even if unintentionally, they could end up enabling this kind of like digital authoritarianism.
And it's not just about like, cameras watching our every move or listening devices in our homes. It's about the information itself, right? Like the article talks about how this kind of power could be used to manipulate what we believe, to influence elections on a scale that we can't even imagine right now.
Yeah, it's like, we already see how algorithms and social media can be used to create these like echo chambers, filter bubbles, where people are only exposed to information that confirms their existing biases. And the article suggests that, under this kind of dynasty, that could be taken to a whole new level with like, sophisticated AI-powered propaganda, deepfakes, all sorts of tools that could make it almost impossible to distinguish between like what's real and what's not.
So it's like the very fabric of reality, the information we base our decisions on, it could be manipulated and we might not even realize it's happening.
That's the fear. And the author doesn't shy away from that. They're basically saying that, this combination of Trump's brand of like, populism and Musk's technological prowess, it could have these like really profound and potentially, devastating consequences for democracy as we know it.
It's a lot to take in, and it's easy to feel, I don't know, kind of helpless, like what can we even do about any of this? But the article, it doesn't end on a completely hopeless note, does it?
No, the author does offer some like,
Hmm.
suggestions for how to push back against this, how to be more aware, more engaged, and how to, maybe steer things in a more positive direction.
So like, what are some concrete steps that, regular people can take?
Well, they talk about, supporting organizations that are fighting for digital rights, for privacy, that kind of thing. They also talk about demanding more transparency from both tech companies and the government. Like, what data are you collecting? How are you using it? Who has access to it? Those kinds of questions.
And of course, there's the whole, being more critical consumers of information, right? Like not just believing everything we see online, doing our own research, being aware of the potential for manipulation and disinformation.
Exactly. It's about, becoming more media literate, thinking critically about the sources of information, and being wary of, things that seem too good to be true or that confirm our biases too neatly.
So it's about being like active participants in shaping the future, not just passive consumers of whatever information is thrown at us.
Absolutely. And it's about, having these conversations, questioning assumptions, being willing to challenge our own beliefs, and not being afraid to, speak up and hold those in power accountable.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive, and I have to say, it's been a little unsettling, to be honest.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to process, but it's important to remember that, this is just one interpretation of events based on a specific set of sources, and it's up to each of us to, to do our own research, to consider different perspectives, and to form our own conclusions.
And, at the end of the day, the future isn't set in stone, right? We all have a role to play in shaping what that future looks like.
Absolutely. By staying informed, by engaging in these conversations, by holding our leaders accountable, we can help ensure a future where technology is used ethically, responsibly, and for the benefit of all, not just a select few.
Well said. And on that note, I think we're going to wrap things up for today.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure, as always.
And to everyone listening, thank you for joining us for another deep dive. We encourage you to keep asking questions, keep learning, keep challenging the status quo, and most importantly, never stop fighting for the future you want to see. Until next time, stay curious.